Today I'm chatting to Jordaan and Gareth Collier, both directors at Creinvest, about how to calculate pension interest and what the process is when calculating this. Eric, let's first unpack what the term pension interest means.
Pension interest is actually a notional amount, and it refers to the amount that the member spouse would be entitled to from his retirement fund at date of divorce. So the importance of this is that it actually allows for what we call the clean break principle at divorce, and that gives effect to the non-member spouse being able to claim a portion of the member spouse's pensionable interest at date of divorce, not having to wait until that member spouse's actual retirement date one day to receive the benefit.
Gareth, what factors are considered when they calculate this amount due to the non-member spouse?
Yeah, so there's two main factors that are looked at. First of all, they look at the type of retirement funds that are in place. Generally speaking, when we look at your employee funds, your pension or provident funds, or previous ones which have now become preservation funds, there they will look at the pensionable interest being the amount that the member spouse would have been entitled to had they resigned on the date of divorce. If we're looking at retirement annuities, then that one has a calculation involved. They look at the member spouse's contributions to the retirement fund, plus a simple interest calculation, which is done on a prescribed rate. The second main factor to consider is your marital regime. So if you are married in community of property, then the pensionable interest applies by default according to the Divorce Act. Whereas if you have the accrual system in place, it may or may not be included depending on the wording of your prenuptial agreement. However, remember, when spouses are divorcing, they are free to elect to include the retirement funds in the divorce proceedings to settle up any divorce settlement claims that they may have.
Eric, what other important points are there that you should be aware of when going through the divorce process when this is done?
Sure, I think the first thing to consider is that pensionable interest is actually calculated on the date of divorce. So that's important, especially where divorce proceedings may take a long time. The actual amount at which that determines pensionable interest is actually only with a value at date of divorce. There is, however, ways in which we can get an estimation of what that amount could be. So you could, before that date, request a calculation from the retirement fund to give you an indication of what the pensionable interest would be for that member spouse. So that's the first one. The second factor to take into account is that where a person have already resigned and is now receiving an annuity or pension from the pension fund, that payment does not form part of your pensionable interest. I think that's an important aspect, and that means that you cannot have a pensionable claim on that pensionable interest because it's not forming part of the definition of pensionable interest. All is not lost, however, so that annuity payment can be taken into account for the non-member spouse, especially where there's a maintenance claim as an example, in determining the ability to contribute towards maintenance. So that's the first factor. And then the second one is also where you are married subject to the accrual system. That living annuity that the spouse has can be taken into account in determining the accrual of each party. How that calculation is done is, however, still undetermined. And we're still waiting on the courts to give us guidance on how exactly that calculation should be done. A third aspect to take into account is the wording of your divorce order. The reason why this is so important is that if that is not worded correctly, the retirement fund can reject that divorce order, which means unnecessary delays, you having to go back to court to amend the divorce order, and that comes with an additional cost. So my advice would be to submit your draft divorce order to the retirement fund to review and determine whether or not it can be given effect to, and that the wording is correct in terms of the prescriptions of the retirement fund as well as that of the Divorce Act.
And then Gareth, once this pension interest has been calculated, what are the non-member spouses' options when they want to withdraw or take this money for themselves?
So once they've been awarded their share, they're going to have the option to either take that share in cash or to have it transferred into a retirement fund of their choosing in their name. So following on from Eric's clean break comment earlier, effectively the retirement fund is split, and then the non-member spouse who's receiving that pension benefit, if they chose to take the benefit in cash, then it is subject to tax on those retirement withdrawal tables, and the tax applied will be based on the non-member spouse, so the person receiving the cash, their history in terms of if they have previously made any retirement fund withdrawals in their own name. If not, the table applies sort of from Rand 0, but it doesn't affect the member spouse at all, right? So the tax is applied to the non-member spouse receiving the cash. The alternative is to transfer into a new retirement fund in their own name. If they chose to do that, then that is a untaxed transfer. And the challenge, though, that they face is that they can't do a bit of both. It's an either or. So they can't choose to take some cash and transfer the rest. Fortunately, you have to choose one or the other.
So I think we can all agree that the term pension interest and everything that goes along with it is a very rigid and set out process. And I think before making those decisions, it's a good idea to go and see someone and make these decisions before you actually proceed and make errors at the end of the day, just so it works out for both spouses and it's as effective as possible.